Clabberton. Welcome to Conversing.
It's such a great joy today to welcome Liz Jacobsen as my guest on Conversing. Elizabeth Jacobsen, a person I've known since a very early age for her and much younger for me, multiple decades of life that we've known one another. She has been a teacher of theater in various schools and theater settings for the last 25 years and more. She graduated from the University of Washington and later from Rutgers. She's been teaching and leading in the Missoula Children's Theater in Missoula, Montana. And most recently, she has, for the last 10 years, been the theater teacher at Stadium High School in Tacoma, Washington. Liz, thank you so much for joining us today.
What a pleasure.
You know, you have been a wonder to me and to many for many years, partly because you embody a person who would go into theater. It is many of your most natural and wonderful gifts. But the fact that you went into theater education is also a deep part of both your family background, your formation, your sensitivity to people, your sense of how you hold many, many things together in tension or in happy assembly. And that surely is a description of what a drama or theater teacher must be. Tell us a little bit about how you even got into this.
Oh, man. I think I got into it when I was really young. I remember my folks taking me to see Annie in San Francisco at the Golden Gate Theater, and I was 8. And I saw that 8-year-old girl come out on stage, and nothing's been the same since. Everything changed. I thought I could do that. And it was magical. And that world that you could escape to, that story that you could relate to and immerse yourself with, was just something that I just wanted more of. And so from a very early age, I just cherished being able to try on different characters and learn about different people through the theater arts. And then connecting with an audience, which is always my favorite part.
You are a connector. That's one of your descriptors for sure. You had parents, and especially a dad, who was a theater enthusiast to the hilt. Some of you who are listeners would, I'm sure, find it very interesting to know that Liz is Earl Palmer's youngest daughter. And Earl, it was always known, attended every performance of every production, whether Liz or their other children were ever involved in, or ever any other sporting event as well. So it was a family of intense enthusiasm. But there was a special connection for you and your dad around theater. How did that developmentally work for you when you were a kid, and as this was coming to pass? What was happening in your relationship with your father?
Yeah, it was just so special. I've always said that my dad was my best audience member, my best support. And I think he just really himself was such a actor and enthusiast, per se. When he was preaching, he was telling such a great story that was the truth, that it wasn't a false character he was portraying, but he was so passionate about it, and I loved listening to his sermons, and probably as much as he loved coming and watching my shows. But we had a mutual admiration society, I guess. But he always loved theater. He told me sitting in the theater, he had a similar experience when he was a small child in the movie theater in the town where he grew up in, McLeod. And he went into a black and white movie, and it was Wizard of Oz, and it was the first colored movie that ever changed, from black and white to color. And he just gasped, the way I did when I saw Annie. Something just, happened to him. So he always loved musical theater. And I think from that early age, he just helped, encourage me as well. And then he came, like you said, he came to everything. He and I performed together at Mount Hermon, and we did a lot of singing around the house. He'd always come into my room every morning to wake me with a song from the musical and a dance to go with it. And so the house was just full of joy and music. And my mom was a great dancer too. So every night after dinner, there was always dancing. But I think that idea that the profound nature of musical theater, especially Les Mis, obviously, it really just grabbed hold of him. That profound nature of being able to tell such a story about people and their life. And then when you add music, it's like when words fail, you add music. And when music fails, you add dance. And when you have all three of those sort of tools to tell a story, you can reach so deeply into an emotional place. And it's just different than any other form, I think, of art because it's so personal. And my dad was the lover of art, and he just encouraged that in me, and he just celebrated everything I did. So it was just so much fun to do and know he was in the audience.
Yes, exactly. The first one
Oh,
to
his
laugh.
laugh you could hear backstage.
First one
Yeah.
to applaud. Yeah, exactly. One of the things that had caused me to bring you on as our guest today is that you and I both know that all across the country this spring, like every spring, high schools across the whole U.S. are having this annual ritual that high schools, most places do, which is the high school musical, typically, sometimes the high school play. Usually the play is in the fall, usually the musical is in the spring. And because we're right in that season, and tell us about the buildup right now to this spring's musical that you're directing.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Oh,
Bring us
man.
on board to the live action.
It's pretty intense, Mark. It's pretty intense. Let me just tell you, the buildup. We cast the show the first week in January, and the kids have been working. So, for 3 months, basically every day after school for 3 to 4 hours, learning songs, dialogue, and choreography. And I don't do anything small. So my goal is always to get as many people involved as possible because I feel like there just needs to be a place for connection for kids. So we are working right now towards going into Tech Week for this, like you said, that's happening all over the country. Well, for us, it's this week. We're getting our technical aspects all set up. So it's the first time our whole crew will be meeting with our whole band, which will be meeting with all of our actors, and our set will be finishing up, and all the cues have to be written, and all the entrances and the costumers they're madly getting all the rest of the costume plots done and all the costumes hung. And I've double cast our shows. So we have two casts that flip flop every day. So we have a yellow cast and a blue cast of leads. And when they're not the lead, they're ensemble. So it's teaching it not 2 times, but almost 4 times because they all have to learn their lead parts and their ensemble parts for both of the casts. And that's all the costumes have to be different as well. So it's over 150 kids I'm getting ready right now. And there's a lot of excitement, a lot of nerves, a lot of just pushing to get all those moving pieces. And it's exhilarating. It really is. And the kids are just over the moon. The kids are working in the lobby, getting the lobby ready. The kids are working. We're going to go visit some middle schools to tell our story. And so there's that component of marketing and the ticket sales, and the kids are working on the program, and the kids are working on, all the final technical aspects. So there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of moving parts, but it's so exciting.
Liz, tell us about the show this year and why this show and the process of how a show comes to be chosen and then adopted by a school that says, yes, we're happy to have this particular show.
Yeah, it is a process. This show is really near and dear to my heart. This show is called In the Heights, which is set in Washington Heights in New York. Manhattan. And it is so special to me because it is written by the just amazing Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I saw him open this show on Broadway with the original cast years ago. But the main character of the story is a character from the Dominican Republic, and I lived in the Dominican Republic in college, and when I was studying abroad, and so there were so many overlapping sort of themes in this show that connected for me. One, that I'd seen him perform in it. This came before Hamilton. This show was really the brainchild that really helped him work out some of the themes that then sort of were answered in Hamilton. It was also sort of his passion story about people in a community that's changing. It's kind of a modern retell of Fiddler on the Roof, which is his favorite musical, set with a community that he knows and loves dearly, more of a Latinx perspective, and just such a beautiful convergence of all these people at a time when everything's changing. And how do you handle that story of living through the change, but also being the hope in the change? Who is the legacy that we are, and who is caring for this community as we move forward? The same questions that Fiddler on the Roof asks. How do you keep your balance in an unsteady world? And so this show was one I always wanted to do. It's really a hard show. There's 25 songs and dances and dialogue. It's a very, very challenging show. And we were set to do this show. We were 2 weeks from production when the governor closed down the state for COVID. So we were heartbroken because this show never got to come to the light. It was so close, and the kids had been working for 3 months, just like now. We were going into Tech Week, and it closed down. And the kids that were in that original cast had become a family. And for months, they kept rehearsing on Zoom. We kept trying to keep our show. They danced at home and sent videos. We tried desperately to hold on to the hope that we could perform it. And then, of course, COVID, nothing got performed. Broadway went dark, everything shut down. So that dream died. And I kept waiting. When would we be able to do it again? And I really wanted to wait that full 4 years so that all those kids had graduated, because I didn't think it was fair to do it again with some of the original cast. I just thought it was too special, the family that had formed. I didn't want to break up the family. So I waited the 4 years until we had a whole new group of kids. And
Amazing.
we're doing it. So it's crazy.
Right. I mean, one of the things that's so amazing is, as you know, musical theater is one of those things that tends to be that people either really love it rapturously or they really hate it. And the lovers of it find themselves, I think, in the space that you were beautifully describing earlier of this intense sense of emotions, a convergence of a set of questions or experiences. And surely all of that is why I think I'm right in saying that the classic high school musical is maybe one of the most diverse gatherings of students across a whole high school in what is literally, in most cases, a new set of relationships, because while they may have pockets of friends, it's also the case that it's much bigger than kind of the classic, just those that are interested in drama. And you have all of these students coming together in a hyper intense way, as you said, from January to now, already 3 months. It'll be 3.5 months by the time it's all up and fully running. And they are sharing a really intense experience that's really hard, that's highly emotionally charged. I mean, just describe that picture. What is the journey from January to now in this year, would you say?
I want to go back just to something you said before I just described the whole journey, but you said something that I love. You said it's one of the most sort of eclectic or cumulative groups of in high school of any sort of grouping of kids together. And I would definitely say that is true at Stadium. I've worked really hard to reach out and pull kids from every area of Stadium. And, I have 1/10 of the school in my show. So it's kind of an interesting cross section, but I just didn't ever want it to be just one type of person because I feel like they normally gravitate to their people, everyone kind of goes into that mode of this is who I hang out with. And I didn't want that to be the reality in theater. I wanted it to be that we pulled from the whole school. And so I have kids that were football players. I have kids that are soccer players. We have baseball, kids playing baseball and basketball. And so we have track kids that they're doing both, and I made it work. And we have a ton of cheerleaders. We have a ton of band kids. We've got kids that are AP students. We've got kids that are in running start. So they're only at school for 1 or 2 classes. We have kids that are totally the tech kids that just want to do the sound and the lights and backstage. I have kids that are, really excited because they love wood shop and they want to build sets. And so it is such a mixture of kids come together. And I love that. And this show, especially, we really reached out because we really wanted to pull a large Latinx community, mixed race community. We wanted it to be a really just rich broth of all ethnicities so that we could tell this story faithfully and really a diverse cross section of kids. And we did it. And it's just so beautiful to see. We have exchange students and just kids from all over walks of life and coming together to tell a story together, and a story that so desperately needs to be told about what it's like to maybe not be always seen and heard, and maybe not always to know where you're going to end up. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful process to watch all these kids work together. So you mentioned that, so I wanted to hit on that. But you said, what is the process we're going in? And I think, in January we have auditions, so we want to try to reach out to kids that never have auditioned. And we have one student that is bilingual and he's the translator for his family. And he never, ever has done theater at all. But he was so excited that there was a story that was featuring Spanish speaking students, Spanish speaking population. And he wrote on his audition form, he said, I'm so excited to represent my culture and tell this story. And he literally never had stepped on a stage ever. And he got a huge role. He didn't even look when he saw the cast list. He just looked for his name at the bottom and didn't see his name and didn't look up at the leads. And then he saw his name up there and he almost passed out.
Oh, great.
But it's so beautiful to watch just these kids become, aware of what struggles are. A lot of them are working jobs to help support their family. So they go right from rehearsal to working at McDonald's. It's really, some of them are doing childcare and they have to miss rehearsals sometimes because they're taking care of different family members. Some of the kids are living on couches and don't have places to go every night. And they're still committed to being there at rehearsal. And they work together. They work really hard. A lot of them say they're in the best shape they've been in because this show has so much dancing. They've been dancing sometimes 3 hours a day, every day, including Saturdays and Sundays, some weeks. But I think it's just that I tell them it's like making a cake. And, they come together and they're all the different parts and components of this cake. I mean, there's flour and sugar and salt and all these different things, and you mix them together and then you layer it and you put, you make this whole cake together. And it's this process that if you tried to explain it to someone with, that had never been a part of it, they'd think there's no way this could actually taste good. but then you see that cake and you see it. And I said, it's like that. And they don't know at first. I said, you have to trust me. But by the end, boy, they all know. They all know, and they all want to come back because they've never experienced something, many of them, in their lives like this.
I'm Mark Labberton. You're listening to Conversing.
Yeah, I think for some kids, I've certainly observed over many years as a parent, as well as a high school student myself, though I was never involved in theater and didn't do any musical theater, any kind of theater in high school. I was really aware that there was this congealing of a new community, this unexpected group of people who had maybe as close to a family experience as anything they've ever experienced, except their family itself. And it's really, really amazing. Tell us about the process of helping students to really enter into the storytelling quality. Because I think one of the things, Liz, about you and about other drama teachers and theater teachers that I know is that they're obviously in it for the kids. They're in it for the content, though, as well, of the project, whatever the musical or any other production they might be doing, and inviting students that are not necessarily, for the reasons we've just said, acquainted with the theater. And now you're going to lead them into not only doing something new, but actually thinking in a different way than many of them would have done, to actually think of themselves and enter into being storytellers, which just feels such an important Rubicon, just all of its own. So how do you do that?
That's one of my favorite parts about it. And that's where picking the right show. And I take a long time to really think, what does my community need? What's the story we need to tell? What do these kids need? And my musical director, my costumer, and I, we meet after show and we start talking about the next show, and then we start thinking about it. And then we kind of come back and say, what do we think are the most important things that we need to talk about with this group? And that's kind of how we start thinking about it, because I do think telling that story and those themes is so critical. And so whatever story we're telling, I try to pull out the major things that we need to really talk about. And then we do table work. I call it, coming to the kitchen table and having some talks where we talk through. I mean, we've talked a lot about, hard issues. When we did Hairspray, we talked a lot about racism and what that felt like in Baltimore and what it feels like now. And, when we did Les Mis, we talked about grace and forgiveness and how Jean Valjean experienced that. And that made such a difference. And Javert couldn't experience that. And what is it like to really forgive someone and feel forgiven? And in the Heights, we're talking so much about how do you basically be a part of something? Because there's people that have become sort of family and they're not related, and they've played crucial roles in being a support and being a network for a community. And there's a line in the Heights. It's without me, who keeps the legacy? Who keeps the coffee sweet, and who keeps telling these stories? And because Abuela Claudia did that for the neighborhood, she kept track of everyone, and she loved everyone, and she supported and she encouraged and watched everyone. And some of the people that she kept track of basically take that responsibility when she no longer can do that. And a lot of these kids that I have don't have role models. And some of them don't have parental support, or they don't have extended family support. And so they need to seek that out, but they also need to be that for their siblings. And so we've talked about some of those themes. We talked about the theme of when, you don't speak the language or you don't have the financial stability, And you feel more peripheral. What does that feel like? Are you overlooked? And I had a student say that when we did this show, he was always so embarrassed. Before doing this show, he was so embarrassed to ever say he was from Mexico. And he thought of that as just this huge embarrassment. And then after we started talking about this show and started talking about the beauty of some of these cultures, he said, I am proud for the first time in my life of saying I'm Mexican. And we really have celebrated the whole Latino community and the culture of the Dominican Republic, of Cuba, of Puerto Rico, of Mexico. And they talk about all these amazing cultures in the music and in these stories. And it's so great because some of these kids have never thought anything about, some of these issues. And so telling those stories of what it's like to feel peripheral, or what it's like to be in a place where you're getting pushed out, or what it's like to maybe be the role model, those stories are so important. There's a character in The Heights
Mm-hmm.
who is the piragua man who does the shaved ice. And he keeps saying, keep scraping by, keep scraping by, keep scraping by. And you just keep going, keep going, keep going. And I love that image. And we've talked
Mm-hmm.
about some people are just scraping by, but they're not stopping. They're still
Mm-hmm.
going. And they're still
Mm-hmm.
part of this story. And there's joy and there's beauty. And just because you're scraping by doesn't mean that you aren't still a integral part of that community. And it's just so beautiful
Right.
to take the time and have the luxury of being able to point out these themes and then have kids just
Mm-hmm.
break down in tears because it hits them and it connects to them in a way that they
Yes.
haven't been aware of.
Yes. Right. I mean, this is where art unlocks us in ways that nothing else but art really does. It provokes us from different angles. It causes us to suddenly see and feel and become aware of something that might have already been there in some way, but it distills it in some way that allows us to access it and to respond to it in a very, very, very strong way. I think most art does that in some way or another. And in the meantime, you're a person that's in your job, like all of these theater teachers all over the country right now that are exactly in the circumstance. They're on the edge of tech week or whatever, or they're just coming off having finished their final performance, or they're still anticipating it later in April. You have, I would say, one of the most unique bird's eye views of kids and their issues that they bring to the table. I don't want to focus on just this year's cast, so this is meant as a question that's a little broader than that. But educate us who are not in that vortex with you. Tell us, give us images, give us language, give us descriptors of, as it were, what are you seeing in students right now? What are they carrying? What are their hopes? What are their joys? What are their hardest struggles? Just take some time to just paint that picture for us.
Yeah. I mean, I love high school kids. I love them for so many reasons, but I think one thing is kids are always so excited to be a part, and really try something. And I think that's I mean they have energy, right? And that's part of what's just so
Right.
intoxicating about that age. I think right now the bird's eye view is I think a lot of kids are so lonely. And they still have that desire and want to be a part, but they don't necessarily always know how because so much
Mm-hmm.
has changed with especially phones and sort of virtual world, that I think there are more barriers to being a part and being connected. And I think that's why we need more than ever, we need ways kids can be connected and be a community. And a lot of
Right.
kids
Yeah.
just don't have that. And that's what they just yearn for. And so it's like the fact that I get to be with kids in an environment where they don't have their phones out and they're focused on something so positive together. That is just the most beautiful part of my job. And it's so wonderful because as a teacher now, every day, I'm taking roll and I look out and every single person during the day sitting in my classroom is on their phone. Every every single kid. But then when I begin class, then I say, okay, put away your phones. My kids do. And because even, during the day, even kids that didn't want to be in theater and got stuck there by accident, by the end, they're on board and they are joining in whatever way, even if it's a totally new thing for them. And for some of them, it's the beginning of something new that they're going to be a part of. And it's so exciting. So many of
Right.
the kids that are in my after school program in my theater got there because they were in my class. And I said, hey, you should audition. And they said, well, I would never do that. Like, I don't know anything about that. And I said, I think you'd have fun. You should just come and try. And those are the kids that needed it the most because they never saw themselves there. That wasn't something that was paved for them. That was something that they did because I had a relationship with them and I invited them. And now their whole world is different. I always say to kids, I say,
Right.
I don't have dreams or hopes that all of you are going to end up in LA or Broadway. I said, that's not my dream for you. I said, a few of you will. And I have some kids that have, but I said, my dream is that you're going to be the best lead of your leading role in your life. And you're going to be able to talk to people and you're going to be able to look people in the eye and you're going to be able to jump into any group and any combination of people and be comfortable in your own skin, working alongside people that are different than you. And you are going to be able to speak out for yourself and advocate in a creative way because you've problem solved in ways on stage and behind the scenes that you
Mm-hmm.
never thought you could.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, you are going to be the best leading role in your drama of your life. And that's my hope for you. And I mean, I do a whole lesson on small talk, Mark, because they can't even have, when they came out of COVID, they could not even have a conversation. They couldn't look you in the eye. And that was across the board because kids are not meant to sit in a dark room all day on a computer and do school.
Right.
And so now I'm seeing they're coming back and it's so wonderful to see that because kids need to be around other kids. Kids need to be engaged and connected and part of a community. And there's
Right.
so few ways
Right.
anymore that they can. And so that's what I love. I love that I get to help open their eyes to what their lives could be and not just
Right.
on Broadway or in LA, but in their own life, wherever they're going to be the best at it.
Right. Right. Liz, the picture that you painted of being the best lead in their own personal lives is a really beautiful vision. And I do think it happens actually for many students who go through these kinds of experiences that you've described. But you mentioned loneliness as an example. What would be some other issues? You talked about some family
Yeah.
challenges, lots of complexity, economics,
Yeah.
race.
I think race is a huge issue. And that's the reason that's one of the reasons I really wanted to do this show, but I didn't enter into it naively. I knew we had to have conversations about that, and we did. I invited the Black Student Union to come and meet with us. I went and talked with the Spanish teachers. I tried to really address. I had a drama council meeting, invited everyone to come and give their opinion about how do we enter into a dialogue faithfully. So race is really an issue now. People don't want to tell someone else's story. They don't want to be unauthentic. They want to be very sensitive. But the problem is sometimes in not wanting to tell someone else's story, we end up silencing voices that don't get to be heard. And it's so important that all the voices get to be heard. So I think that's an issue. I think gender is a huge issue right now. Acceptance. I think a lot of kids want to feel something desperately. There's a lot of kids that just are crying out to feel anything. So there is self-harm and isolation. I already mentioned. I think the family has probably taken on new complexities with both parents working or sometimes single parents working multiple jobs. Kids are moved around a lot. I've had some kids that this is their 8th school they've been at. Language and just emotional difficulties in school. So lots of kids are just having, I think issues where they just can't cope as well because they don't have the tools. And oh man, the list goes on and on, Mark. I think a lot of kids don't realize how strong they are. And maybe that's because they haven't had the support to, really test. Sometimes when kids don't have that support, they're afraid to test those boundaries. And then when you don't test and have support to hold you in that situation, you don't bounce back as fast. And so I see with some kids, there's a frailness or fear that they won't be able to handle it. When I think that's something theater teaches you, like you learn how to handle it, right? Because the show must go on. And that's such a valuable skill that you can learn. You are strong and you get through it and then you inoculate yourself the next time you're stronger. And so I love that kids kind of get stronger through the process. But there's just a disconnectedness that I didn't see as much when I started. And I see it very profoundly now. And I think it's mainly just because of certain issues related with COVID, but also related with the online presence, where you feel like you're connected, but you really aren't connected, right? Or you feel like you're always missing out because other people are connected.
Right. It's pretty breathtaking to hear that list. It's not as though any of that is a surprise, but I'm so grateful, Liz, to have the chance for you to just name all those things. And for the people who are listening to this podcast, just sit for a moment with the convergence of those things in any given student's body and life, but also to converge then in the random experience of a school, almost regardless of whether it's a public or private school, but certainly in this case, in a public high school, with whoever happens to show up for whatever sets of reasons that puts them in that geography for this period of time in their life, who end up signing up to be a student at this school and then end up through that process somehow, in many cases, in your case, 1/10 of the schools signing up for this amazing opportunity, challenge, overwhelming difficulty at times, unbelievable joy, creativity, beauty, pain. It's just, it's this convergence that I think is so remarkable. And I do want to say, just acknowledging that I think a drama teacher, a theater teacher experiences that in a very concentrated and even more verbalized and focused way. But those same dynamics are present in math and chemistry and English and every athletic team, and it's always live theater. That's the thing. It's just always
and
live
I would
theater.
say across any high school in America, I mean, it's absolutely
yes.
Everyone's trying their best, to live out this life, this story, and each day you have all these things you have to deal with, and I think it's so interesting where the characters intertwine, right? Where all those characters, that's where the character work comes from, of all these characters working.
Right.
And it's not as interesting if they just parallel, like two dots that just go on forever. that's not that interesting, is it? But when those two dots intersect, that's where it becomes a spark. That's where it's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
it's that work of where your life intertwines. And like you said, we're in a math class or maybe on the football field or something where you have these other relationships that form and these connections that's where you get the sparks and that's where you get the stars.
Right.
Yeah.
Liz, have you seen unexpected friendships not only form during this process, but endure beyond the process of doing the show
Yeah, I
itself?
do. I have so many alumni that come back and want to give back to the program. And it's so cool because they're still, they've moved on. They're in college, they're in trade school, they're in industry, and they come back and they want to still stay connected to the students as in a mentor role and they're still connected with their many of their fellow castmates. And that's really beautiful because they saw, I have almost this just cycle of people coming back, and I've had a lot of my alums be theater interns or college interns, and it's so cool to watch them give back and just watch that repeat of wanting to invest still.
To
Yeah.
continue to pass it on.
So that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And then I think just, once you graduate, you're just kind of, there's no there anymore and there's nothing to come back to. But every year, the fact they all have something to come and they all come to the shows, they're so excited when the spring break lines up and they can see it, those that are far away. But it's a connection for them. And I always have a alumni seating area where they can sit. I always have them stand in the audience. And that is really cool for them to also see how far they've grown. And whenever they come back, I interview them in front of my cast. And I always say, tell me something that you felt like you took away from this program. What's something that you are using in your life now? And it's really beautiful to hear the things that they say. And I just feel like it's having an impact on the people that they're around now in their new schools in New York or in Boston or in LA or in Washington, wherever they are.
Liz, today it's just been such a joy to hear this description because I do feel like we're at a very odd space in our culture and in the United States and cultures. Of course, it's always multiple and many and highly divergent, lots of intersections, good, bad, and otherwise. And in a certain way, the artifice, the really good artifice of a play, of a musical, takes all of the array that is already present in high school, and it deliberately moves it all into one concentrated space around a third project that is not school per se, but it involves the same people. And you literally create something out of nothing by putting your whole being into this effort under the guidance of a great teacher who can then direct and coach them into this experience. And I'm not here trying to be idealistic. I think what I've described so far is actually just what happens. It's what's necessary in order for the product to actually emerge and for the performances to happen. But in the middle of it, the really richest part of it, and the thing that I want to honor for somebody that's doing the kind of work that you're doing, or any other teachers that are contacting students at whatever ages, how significant it is to be willing to welcome the being of the students and not just the doing of the students or the thinking of the students, but the being of the students all the way into this combined reality that you are going to make. And if enough of those experiments, if we use that sort of as a model and thought across our society and culture, what are those places where not necessarily through the production of a musical, but it may be through the production of a musical, it may be something artistic, it may not be, but whatever it is that can bring diverse, effective, active communities of people together in a project for everyone's well-being is a way of changing culture and healing culture and of renewing individual kids' lives. And I was talking to my sister-in-law recently who had been involved in theater all the way through school, in college and beyond. And her stories of the way that theater made space and filled space was just so moving to hear about. And we all, I hope, are aware of the significance of our need for that. Like the kids that you're describing are so isolated. What does it take to find your place, to struggle, to risk, to take the step of actually moving beyond our fears into a new space where, as you say, it's like a whole new reality begins to open up. And the plausibility horizon that often gives us our most intense fears suddenly changes because actually the world has far more plausibility about moving in a given direction than we might have ever learned from our family or our circumstances or our needs. So, Liz, in saying thank you for this podcast, I'm also saying thank you personally for the extraordinary and awarded leadership that you have brought to Stadium High School and in the Heights this year. I just am thrilled and wish I could be there for it. And I also want to just say how I hope that anyone who might be listening to this will really understand the significance of this kind of role in a certain way. And I mean this as a rich word. It's like a really ordinary space where something absolutely transformative can occur and does. And I just know your students are feeling that way, Liz, already, and will feel that way by the end of the show and the breakdown and everything else that comes with theater. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing what you're doing and who you're being and who you're hoping your students will do and
Well,
be
thanks,
as well.
Mark. You've been an encouragement to me almost my whole life. You performed my wedding. And before that, I think you came and saw me in some of my shows in high school.
I did. Absolutely,
And
I did.
that's, I think the whole reason that I can do what I do definitely is because of those people that invested in me. And I think of my dad and my mom just being such amazing supports. And I always tell my
Yes.
students, hey, if you don't have anyone in that audience out there for you, I'm out there. And so I get to do that
Right.
now for those kids. And, you've been that support for so many people, and your role you played has just been critical in my life too, Mark. And I'm grateful for that. But what an honor it is to, just like Lin-Manuel says, we get to carry on this legacy, and it's gifted to us, and we get to gift it. And I am grateful for those that have gifted it. So I'm just trying, just scraping by. Yeah.
Keep scraping.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to Conversing on your favorite podcast app to listen to new episodes as they're released. And please leave a review. Conversing is produced by Peter Laberton and distributed by Fuller Studio.